In the heart of Washington, D.C., April Carlisle, a young investigator with a troubled past, steps into a world shrouded in mystery and moral ambiguity. Driven by a desire to make a difference, she joins the enigmatic agency led by Jessica Ingrams, a sharp and calculating leader with a reputation for crossing lines. April's journey begins with rigorous, unconventional tests that reveal a job unlike any she's ever imagined. Guided by Jessica, April faces secrets, challenges, and ethical dilemmas that could reshape her identity. But how far is she willing to go? And can she keep her moral compass in a world designed to blur the lines? April Carlisle took a deep breath to calm herself, then opened the office door. She walked in and sat down in a soft chair near the desk. She smiled warmly at the woman across from her, who leaned back in a big leather chair, observing her closely. Both women were dressed in professional attire. They wore tailored skirts, blouses, and heels. April's striking red hair was styled nicely around her neck, while the other woman sported a chic blonde bob that framed her face beautifully with light makeup. April was a slender 26-year-old woman, single and confident in her place in the world. She felt comfortable in her skin and carried herself with grace. Standing at 5'9", she had long legs that she liked to show off modestly. April thought of herself as elegant, even if she had her fun moments too. She had green eyes, and her silky red hair required a lot of care, as it could be unruly. Fortunately, she had a nice tan from living in sunny Arizona. She held a double degree in criminal investigation and behavioral psychology, along with training in therapeutic psychology and various investigative skills. Originally, she had aimed to join the FBI, but after learning about her family background, especially regarding her father, she decided to focus on helping people deal with hidden pain. This choice led her to the meeting she was in now. The woman at the desk was typing on a laptop while looking over her glasses. She glanced up as April entered, tilted her head, and then waved toward the chair opposite her as she continued typing. As she sat there, April admired the beautiful view of the Potomac River from the windows behind her potential boss. They were on the 7th floor of a modest office building in Washington, D.C., and she wondered how much space like this might cost. Surely it was quite valuable. The company seemed to be doing well, something she was already aware of. As April reflected on the past weeks, she felt a mix of hope and determination stirring within her. After she received the business card from the woman at the desk, a shiny black card with tiny writing that was hard to read, she called the number and found herself in a Washington, D.C. hotel the next day. The testing began right away. There were questions about her family, especially her father and uncle. That meeting was short since she did not know her dad well. They also did physical exams, mental tests, and even obstacle courses. One night, she even spent time in a room where strange sounds were played. It felt like it went on forever, and she was not sure what the purpose of some tests was. However, she figured out most of them, trying hard to show what they expected from a field agent. It was tiring, and she was relieved when it was finally over. In a way, one test surprised her. Even with others watching closely, she managed to complete the task without feeling shy or wrong about it afterward. She didn't expect to handle that part so well, but it intrigued her. Later that evening, she found herself looking up articles online about it, aware she might have been watched. She figured it would add an interesting point for discussion. The woman at the desk finished typing and closed her laptop, focusing fully on April. "Dr. Ingrams," said April, showing a bit of respect. Jessica Ingrams smiled at her. "April, it's great to see you. Have you had enough time to think things over? We've certainly put you through a lot." April laughed softly. "Yes, it's been quite the experience. I think I've made my decision." Jessica leaned forward. "That's good to hear. Would you like a drink?" April nodded. "It's a bit early for me, but sure." Jessica stood up and went to the small bar in the corner of her office. As she mixed a martini, she asked, "Dirty, right?" April agreed. They knew how she preferred her drinks, just like they seemed to know everything else about her. While Jessica prepared the drinks, they both remained quiet. She returned, handing April her drink. "Let's sit in the comfortable chairs and talk. It's more personal." April picked up her drink and followed Jessica to the small couch and chair. Before sitting, Jessica leaned out of the door and called, "Angela, no calls for the next hour, okay?" Then she closed the door. Instantly, all outside noises stopped, more proof of money being spent. "So, April, what do you think?" Jessica asked, taking a sip of her drink and focusing on April. April took a sip too, then set her drink down on the table, careful to use a coaster. "I think I'm really going to like it here," she said. Jessica laughed, stood up, and walked over to April. She hugged her and said, "I think so too. We're lucky to have you. But now, we need to talk about some not-so-great parts. Before we make things official, I have to mention a few downsides. I'm sure you've thought about some of them already. First, there are relationships. You might know about this, we've all experienced it. Even though you pass the initial tests, you may not realize how this job can change you. It's demanding, and it can make forming real connections difficult. It might be years before you can settle down, and even then, a regular 9-to-5 routine may not suit you. You might find it hard to live that way. After this, other things might seem less important. Also, unless your partner knows everything about you, the relationship could struggle. Mine did, as did many of my former teammates. I need to warn you seriously about this. While you'll be out helping others, your own relationships may take a back seat. Plus, you might be asked to do some unusual things that could change your feelings in unexpected ways. April nodded, a little impatient, as if she thought she understood everything already. Then there's the issue of feeling powerful. I know you have a strong personality, the tests showed that, and you also care about justice. But sometimes things happen to agents. They can feel a sense of superiority, like they can control or manipulate people. This can affect some individuals in ways we can't always predict. We know the signs, and I'm telling you now, if we see any of that in you, and we will be watching closely, we will step in immediately. Jessica paused to take another sip of her drink, and April chimed in, "Oh, I'm not worried about that. I know I can handle it. As for the relationships, well, I'm sure the tests showed I can separate myself from that too." Jessica set her drink down and leaned back in her chair, thinking before she spoke. Yes, the tests did hint at a certain confidence, a tendency to think highly of yourself while not paying attention to others. Oh, did you think you were clever with those tests, giving us just the right answers? Did you ever think that those tests were meant to see how you would react? The results aren't what matter to us. We care about what you actually did or wrote. You studied psychology, so you should understand this. We've been doing this for a while, and we weren't clueless before you arrived. Jessica leaned closer and placed her hands on April's knees. In a quiet voice, she said, "You might think you're smarter than everyone else, but you're not that special. There are people who could persuade you to do anything, even wear a silly costume at a big event if they wanted." April was surprised. Jessica then pulled her hands back and picked up her drink, looking at the way the light shone through it. She said, "But a little confidence is good, especially at first when you really need it. After a couple of missions, you'll learn a lot more. Now, do you have any questions?" April felt a bit nervous. After all the testing, she knew Jessica Ingram's reputation, and being in her focus was quite intimidating. But she steadied herself, realizing this might be her chance to get real answers. Taking a deep breath, April asked, "First, why me?" "I thought I explained that when we met in Arizona. We've been looking for people like you. You have the skills we need and a desire to help. We know about your father and uncle and how that has affected your goals. Sure, we might be mistaken, but we are very skilled at understanding people. You need what we offer because it allows you to make a difference directly and on your own terms. You'll be helping those who wouldn't seek help otherwise, who might just keep struggling and causing problems." April took a moment to think and then asked, "Isn't what you do a little sneaky?" "Sneaky? Yes, it is, April. That's the point. I started this agency to do those things that others wouldn't. Do you think that people with years of experience in the field are going to want to sit down and talk about their struggles when they return? They've had to rely on their instincts and won't be eager to discuss personal issues. Those are the people I want to assist, but we can't approach them directly, since they wouldn't accept it. So we do it in a way that's less obvious. I know you're not truly bothered by this. I've seen your test results. So I'm assuming you're just trying to provoke a response? All right, then. This time, go ahead." "Okay, I'm fine with that. I was just curious if you were," April replied. "If I were, I wouldn't be running this company, would I?" "Yes, I guess not. So what about the, illegal activities? Jessica put her fingers together. The illegal activities? Yes. Well, we do sometimes break the law. There are two parts to this. One is treating people without them knowing. This goes against traditional medical ethics. I believe the results justify it definitely. We've helped people who would not have been helped otherwise. Ethics can be tricky. There's no single rule that fits everything. But that's just my reasoning. Yes, we do break that rule, but I see it as more of a guideline than a strict rule. Secondly, most of what we do here isn't actually illegal. There's no law against pretending to be someone else unless you're pretending to be a government official. Most of what we do stays in the gray area of legality. But sometimes we may do things that could be seen as illegal, like looking people up, checking credit scores, and entering places without permission. If that upsets you, now's the time to leave. But I don't think it does. I think it's thrilling for you. April smiled at that. Jessica had a point. No, I'm not worried about that. I find it all very exciting, like a secret mission. So if we get caught, what happens? April asked. Well, that's an important question. The worst that could happen is that we all go to jail. However, in most cases where this has come up, we've had good lawyers, and we've worked with people who can help make charges disappear. So far, we've been careful and have never really faced that. But it could change depending on what we do, and you should be aware of that. Jessica relaxed her hands and took a sip of her drink. How many times have you been caught? April asked without thinking. Caught? Oh, you mean when others found out what we were doing? Only twice. We've done about 45 operations since we started the company, and we've been discovered twice. One time was with a former CIA agent who was quite unstable. He returned home after a difficult assignment to find his wife had moved on and was having a baby with someone else. We tried to assist him, but he was so unstable that he suspected everyone around him. His mix of brilliance, paranoia, and distress eventually led him to realize we were an organization. He didn't understand we were trying to help. He even came into our office. It took 3 people to convince him to calm down. He's currently in a facility in Virginia, and he will likely be there for the rest of his life. It's sad because we should have noticed his struggles before we took on his case. I felt really upset about that. It's one of the few times we've not only failed, but made things worse. There was a pause, and then April asked, "And what about the other situation?" Another moment of silence passed before Jessica spoke again. That was about a tech worker in Washington State. I was involved personally. It was during the early days of this agency. April couldn't believe it. You got caught involving a tech worker? Really? With all this technology and people around, a tech worker managed to catch you? Yes, he was very clever and careful. It all turned out okay in the end. You'll read the case notes for more details. April nodded and then asked another question. So, how often do you feel like you failed? I mean, in reaching your goals. So far, we have completed 43 operations, and we have 3 ongoing right now. We have met all our goals in about 13 of those operations. Even though that seems like a small number, it's tough to always meet the expectations of the clients. Most of the time, we do a decent job of fixing issues, but there are things we just can't change. Typically, we improve the situation to some extent. I'd say we manage to fix things around 75% of the time. We've only made things worse twice, and in those cases, I honestly don't know what else we could have done. Things were going to get worse anyway. We just sped up the process. It really depends on what the clients want. If they say, make it like it was before X happened, then it's unlikely we can meet that goal completely. It's almost impossible. However, if they ask, help this couple forgive each other and move forward, then that's a more achievable aim, and we can often succeed at that goal completely. I work closely with clients to refine what they really need, but you know how it goes. Some clients don't want to hear it, and it's their choice since they are paying. Also, you need to understand, Jessica went on, what we can do is like putting a big patch over a wound, or in the worst situation, giving immediate help. The healing many of our clients require takes years. When there's a serious break in trust in a relationship, it can take a very long time to repair. We can't provide that kind of time. What we need to do is step in, address the immediate problems, and help everyone start to heal. We can't always be there for every step. We are usually called in to help someone through a particular situation. and we strive to guide them toward healing. But this is not a guaranteed process. We do the best we can. I must say, our efforts often exceed what most others can do. Jessica paused to take a sip of her drink, playing with the ice in her glass. Another thought struck April. Aren't you taking a big risk here? I mean, I've completed all the tests, I know people here, and I know who you are. You've just mentioned that you break the law. What if I didn't agree with this idea? What if I went to the authorities or the media? Jessica laughed softly. April, do you really think we don't do our homework? If there was any chance of that in your background, we wouldn't be having this talk. We're not new to this, you know. But since you asked on day one of your testing, we deposited $25,000 in your savings account. It's there now, a gift from us to you. Call it a service fee for helping us. Even if you choose to walk away now, it's still a gift. However, if you did go to the authorities, you've been here for 3 weeks with $25,000 in your account traced back to us. How do you think that would look if someone questioned you about it? That seems a bit sneaky, April frowned. Jessica shrugged. Yes, well, as you noted, we don't play by all the rules. But April, I know you want to do this. I understand you're just testing the waters, and that's fine. I would expect that. But remember, we are experienced, and I don't want you to lose sight of that. I won't say we're like a happy family. We are a business that helps people by working discreetly, and we are good at what we do. The team here is the best I could find, and we're offering you a place as an operational field agent. It's the toughest job we have. You'll be out there, making important decisions for others. It's challenging, it can be frightening, and you'll often question your choices. But when you succeed, you change lives for the better, maybe even save them. What do you think? April set her drink down, adjusted her skirt, and looked up. When do I start? A week later, April was settled into her new office on the 6th floor of the building that, she learned after being hired, belonged to Ingram's and Associates. When she reported for work the following Monday morning, she met Dermot McConaughey, a capable older Scotsman with a soft accent. Dermot was a big man, graceful in his movements, and quite tall, over 6 feet 6 inches. Though he was large, he was skilled in his work. He was the operations chief for Ingram's, meaning he planned all operations and oversaw everything that happened. Dermot was Jessica Ingram's main assistant. He made sure operations went smoothly, that supplies were ready when needed, and basically managed everything in the building. He was also her direct supervisor. April quickly saw that Dermot was very efficient. He knew all the details of the building, who did what, how often, and with whom. If she asked for something via email, it was handled the same day, and if it couldn't be done, she received updates on when it would happen. She started to appreciate how carefully Jessica chose her team. Dermot was dedicated to his job. He always had an iPad with him and was the quickest typist she had ever seen. He joked that he couldn't wait to get some new technology. He was a friendly man, quick to share a laugh, but also focused on work, making him easy to be around. She had a sense that he was evaluating her, and that feeling was likely correct. She noticed he didn't wear a wedding ring, but decided not to ask about it. When April arrived at the office, Dermot welcomed her, showed her to her office, set up her email, and gave her the usual paperwork for new employees, like insurance forms and payment forms. He also handed her the company handbook, which made her smile. Then, she received a pile of over 30 project reports, plans, profiles, analyses, and final reports, and was told to read them all because there would be a quiz at the end of the week. Before she could begin her work, Dermot introduced her to the heads of different departments as the new field agent newbie. She met Talia Cronkite, who led a group of 5 analysts doing research for operations. Talia was quiet, with short hair, no makeup, and big glasses, the kind of person who seemed to blend in. April was surprised when she later saw Talia as the in-house self-defense instructor. It reminded her not to judge people based on looks. Then she visited the Field Operations Center, where there were 3 busy areas, all with large screens and desks that were staffed around the clock. It looked like something out of a spy movie. She couldn't help but stare as she walked in, and everyone looked up to see her, their eyes adjusting to the light coming from the open door. Dermot introduced her to each of the Operations Center managers, all of whom worked directly with him. She learned that the Operations Center monitored agents in the field, answered requests for information, and helped with any support needed. They also handled communication with the companies that the agents claimed to represent. Next was the Resources Center, where agents received communication and monitoring tools. As she explored the lab, she picked up different devices, curious about their uses, and if she would be taught how to use them. The person in charge seemed very knowledgeable, and as April met more people, she noticed that the whole operation had a very geeky vibe. The leader of this department was Tom Mercy. He fit the classic nerd stereotype, even wearing a Lord of the Rings shirt when she first met him. He had messy long hair that partly covered his face and wore black jeans with a studded belt. April couldn't help but smile at how much he looked the part. A week later, when he came to the kitchen wearing slacks and a polo shirt, with his hair neatly tied back, she realized he had surprised her. Things began looking up after that. April was introduced to the group of field agents, and she was now one of them. There were 7 agents currently between missions, 3 were just back from the field, and 4 were getting ready to head out again. When she entered the briefing room, which had nice coffee and donuts, she felt everyone sizing her up. Dermot introduced her, saying, "Hey everyone, this is the newbie, April. Remember your first time? If you want her to do better, help her out." He nodded at April and said, "Make yourself comfortable. Remember, there's a quiz at the end of the week. After that, you'll team up with an active operation to see how it works. You'll have some training before going out yourself." Then he glanced at his iPad and left. Everyone stared at her. She started, unsure of what else to say. "Hi, I'm April. What's happening?" The group of 7, most busy getting coffee or donuts, exchanged glances and hid their smiles. One agent, a friendly blonde woman, approached with her hand out. "I'm Megan. Great to meet you. So are you into investigation or psychiatry?" "Excuse me," April replied, a bit confused. "Everyone here has a postgraduate degree in one of those fields. It's something this place values. Want some coffee?" "Yes, please," April said, feeling more relaxed. "Actually, I have experience in both." Megan looked at her thoughtfully and said, "Well, aren't you the perfect fit?" She smiled broadly, making sure April knew she was being friendly. Not knowing how to respond, April just smiled firmly. They got coffee together, and Megan began introducing April to the others. Everyone made an attempt to make her feel welcomed. A couple of the men shared their thoughts on her job choice. April noticed that while most were good-looking, none of them were exceptionally attractive. It made sense, since these agents had to blend in with real people in their work. They had to be appealing enough to interact with their targets, but not so stunning that others would take too much interest in them. Curious about their work, she asked a few of them about their cases. Megan replied, "I just got back. I was working with a college professor who was rumored to be the one who solved cold fusion. His hidden feelings came to light when one of his teaching assistants got close to him. He felt confused and guilty, and his wife was unsure how to respond. It took some time to work things out, but I think they are all living together happily now." She smiled after sharing her story, and April could see why Megan was a good field agent. Her smile was warm and lit up her whole face, including her eyes. April wondered if she could do the same. As they sat down at the conference table, April took a sip of her coffee and asked, "So who hires us? I mean, who knows about us?" One of the men, Ryan, put down his phone and replied, "You'd be surprised by who knows about us. Most major government organizations do. We get hired by universities, the military, the NSA and FBI, sometimes even the CIA. We've done work for MI6 in the UK and Mossad in Israel, among others. We've even helped private individuals here and there, anyone who needs help in their life without knowing they are getting it." April asked a question that had been on her mind. "But why? I get what we do, but is there really that much of a need for it? If people are struggling, why not just send them to a therapist? It feels like too many people want to act like they're in a spy movie." Ryan laughed and said, "April, you'd be surprised how many leaders want their teams to be doing well. Everyone has their own struggles in some shape or form. What's interesting is that often those who could have the biggest impact are sometimes facing their own difficulties, or at least might in the future. And they are usually the least likely to ask for help. So someone has to step in, someone has to care, someone has to be brave enough to help them out, and that's our job. Trust me, there's a real need." "I'll bet I could take you in a challenge," Megan said to Ryan, her eyes shining. Only because you play volleyball. I'm more into golf. Ryan joked. My skills might not be the best, but they work just fine. At least no one is bothering me. Megan quickly replied, So you enjoy being challenged, then? April observed. She noticed that Ryan and Megan shared a bond. They seemed comfortable with each other, which was easy for her to overlook, but she realized this vibe came from how Jessica shaped the workplace atmosphere. April had to rethink how she viewed Jessica Ingram's. To shift the conversation, April asked, Are there any social events? Do we have a softball team or barbecues? Megan responded, Well, there's nothing official. We can't have teams since people might ask about Ingram's and what we really do. We already have enough to manage at work, but we do gather occasionally for casual parties. It's nice to know everyone and support each other's projects, so you'll learn a lot just by being around. Thinking of the reports, April said, I should really get to work. Those reports won't read themselves. As she stood to leave, Megan added, If you need help or have questions, I'm just in the next office. Don't hesitate to ask. We're all here to support each other. April smiled and replied, Thanks, Megan. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. She headed back to her office to begin her tasks. Once seated in her comfortable chair, she set down her coffee and surveyed the desk filled with files. Sighing, she reached for the top one and opened it. At the week's end, Dermot tested her on the reports with both written and spoken questions, and April scored 89%. She felt she could have done better, wishing she could have taken the work home to study. However, Ingram's had a strict policy against this, which made sense given the sensitive nature of the information. When she finished, April leaned back and told Dermot, Okay, I understand the background. When do I get my first case? Dermot, busy tapping on his iPad, looked up. April, there's still a lot more training ahead before you can work alone. I want you to observe Charlie's case. Watch her preparation, interactions, and how she builds her profile as well as her plans. I expect you to offer feedback. There's a briefing tomorrow at 9 a.m. Make sure to attend. Go find Charlie to start today, then take the rest of the day off. You're doing well so far. I know it can be stressful. Have you found a place to live here yet? April shook her head. No, I haven't really had time to look. Dermot took out a card from his pocket. Here, check out this place. I just moved out of it. They have an open apartment at the top. It has a great view, and you can use the roof, too. She took the card and thanked him. She knew she could afford it. Her salary was very high. She was going to earn more in her first year than any of her teachers at college made in 5 years. In the afternoon, she talked with Charlie, a small brunette with a quick laugh that made April smile. It felt genuine, and that made it even more delightful. Charlie explained her case, which involved a 4-star general whose wife had been drawn to another man. The general was at a loss for what to do, and he struggled while leading an operation in Iraq. The army felt responsible and asked for help. Charlie went over the general's situation, his wife's actions, and the other man involved, outlining the plan she was putting together. Once she finished, April went to see the apartment. It was beautiful, and she signed the lease right away. Next, she visited a furniture store, bought what she needed, and arranged for quick delivery. Within a week, she was all moved in. Over the next 4 months, April learned a lot from Charlie. She followed her around, soaking up knowledge about how to ask for background information from the IT team, how to interview people indirectly, gather details, and create profiles of individuals involved. She was expected to make plans to resolve issues, consider alternatives, and prepare backup plans. She also had to make requests for resources and basically plan the entire approach. She discovered that every operation was supervised by Dermot and reviewed by 2 other agents for ideas and approval. She saw how they collected information to build profiles of the individuals involved. Other agents not currently working on an operation helped by befriending people to gather insights without revealing their true purpose. This was done along with the IT department, which helped trace online activity. Additionally, she learned that the resource department had a set of fake identities prepared for use in the operations. Finding background information took a lot of time and required various methods. Getting close to people took time, so Ingram's learned how to do it quickly. He became someone's assistant or pretended to be part of a secret agency. They conducted interviews on potential candidates for non-existent jobs. This tactic needed careful handling to ensure the person being interviewed wouldn't warn the target. It was a strategy that had to be used wisely. April watched as once the profiles were written and plans set, they were reviewed, changed, and approved by others. Once everything was finalized, Charlie went out to do the work. April stayed in the operations center watching Charlie's requests for help or information. She even played a small part, acting as one of Charlie's friends to meet the couple Charlie was trying to assist. It was just a supporting role, but it helped her gain experience. April also found a whole group of part-time workers that the agency could call on. These individuals had skills in following people, security, and more. She was surprised to learn that most of them didn't know much about the agency they worked for, other than it was dedicated to helping others quietly. Ingram's was very good at staying protected. In her personal life, she completed her move from Arizona to Washington. She brought only the furniture she cared about, selling the rest in a weekend estate sale she organized when she flew back. The only thing left in Arizona was her Uncle Marcus's vintage 1965 Cadillac, which was in great shape and had been gifted to her in his will. She felt uncertain about what to do with it, but couldn't bring herself to sell it because it held so many memories, like trips to the Grand Canyon. In the end, she put it in storage in Phoenix, planning to decide later. April also allowed herself one treat: a new car. She went to the building parking lot to see what cars others drove while they weren't working. The cars were nice: Lexus, BMW, Porsches. All were less than 2 years old and cost at least $50,000. She wanted something special but not too flashy. One of her instructors had said that for some people, a car reflects their personality. She wanted something that showed fun and elegance without being showy. She loved convertibles and finally chose a Nissan 370Z convertible. It was powerful enough to thrill her when she drove it and stylish enough to match her taste. She enjoyed driving her new car and often went on weekend trips to New York just for that. She liked her new apartment and loved the view, especially at night. She even took a few cooking classes trying to make the perfect soufflé. She failed each time but had fun trying. After 5 weeks, she realized that no one but the delivery workers had been to her apartment, not even her colleagues. So, she planned a barbecue on the roof the following weekend to invite some company. At work, her training had begun while she watched Charlie do his job. She learned about different skills, like how to handle locks and use the tools provided by the resource department. She learned how to use technology to observe others, and even took driving lessons to handle tricky situations. She also received self-defense training, which was tough but necessary. She had to create different identities, which she probably wouldn't use, but it was interesting to learn how it worked. To make sure she learned them well, she was tested on these identities. One afternoon, she spent time with the research and development team. They looked at her social media accounts and removed any pictures where she could be recognized. The company allowed people to be online but didn't want any identifiable images. April gained a newfound respect for the talented hackers who could delete images from websites they didn't even manage. The most unusual part of her training was when she had to follow 2 high-end escort workers. She learned how to engage with others and understand relationships better. Part of her training involved experimenting to see how well she could fit into their world. She discovered skills in charming people and how to create connections. She thought she was doing well before this, but now she realized she could create lasting impressions. She started to understand what Jessica meant in their earlier talks, that learning these techniques made every interaction feel more like a planned encounter instead of a spontaneous one. It became less about the moment with someone and more about how to approach situations. After that experience, she received training on how to attract others. She was encouraged to read a book called Rules of the Game and then go out to practice her skills. She would go out for dinner with another agent who would pick a person at random for her to learn about. She was told to get a phone number or set up a meeting, even though she would never follow through with it. At first, it was fun, but then she started working with agents who had a strange sense of humor. Trying to flirt with a man on his anniversary dinner with his wife was difficult. She had to do it while he was on his way to the bathroom. She felt guilty about it and decided to pay for the couple's dinner secretly once she had his number. She managed to do this by suggesting something playful: they would not ruin a marriage on such a special night for a coworker. After her training was over, she was assigned 2 targets. One knew she was coming, and the other did not. She had to get an important piece of information from both, and succeeded. The unaware target was the wife of a city councilman, and she needed to get details from a specific meeting. This was the first time April had to charm a woman. When she was told about it, she raised an eyebrow and made some sharp remarks about how women are often assumed to be attracted to other women, while men would never be asked to do the same. She was informed that all the male agents had some experience in similar situations. It was just part of the work. She didn't argue after that. Her job became trickier because the woman was very much attracted to men and had never been with a woman before. Although April had some experiences, she had never really pursued another woman. Her past encounters had been brief. This was new for both of them, and April found it enjoyable. Flirting with a woman required a different approach from what she usually did with men. Surprisingly, when it was over, April felt like she had done something good for the wife. She didn't expect the woman to enjoy it, and she worried a bit about what might happen next. When she checked in on them 3 months later, she saw that both the wife and her husband were dating another girl. It made her smile a little inside. One Friday night, while out with her friend Megan, they were both turning down would-be admirers and playing little games with them, pitting one potential suitor against another, not as part of any training, just for fun. The two of them were sitting at a bar, dressed nicely, enjoying nachos and drinks while watching the crowd around them. They made jokes about the other people in the bar and took turns turning away the men who approached them. After another shot of tequila, Megan reached out and grabbed April's arm. Wait, I have a fun idea. The next guy who comes over, let's spill this glass of water on the floor and then tell him he has to use his jacket to clean it up before we head to the bathroom." They both burst into giggles from having too much to drink and too little to eat. Once they stopped laughing, April wiped her eyes and looked around at the lively bar, watching the couples and people chatting with each other. Suddenly, she felt a bit quieter. "Megan, what do you do for fun, besides going out to bars?" she asked. Megan thought for a moment. "Honestly, not much. My job doesn't leave me much time for anything else. And there's no way I could join any club that needs meetings. I was part of a play once for work. That's how I met someone I needed to know for the job. I discovered I loved it. I enjoyed rehearsals and feeling like I was part of something. I even had a speaking role. But then the job ended before we opened, and I had to leave. You know the rules are there to keep us safe. I regret not being able to stay with the group. I went to the opening night in disguise and sat in the back to watch. They did so well, and I felt left out. Sometimes this job asks for way too much." April nodded. "I understand. I've tried to join some clubs, too. I'm in a volleyball league, but I'm just an alternate. I can't let them really count on me. Oh, and I've always wanted to learn archery. I'm not sure why. I think it's because it's a solo activity, not a competitive one. At least, that's what I thought. But you know what? I'm actually really good at it. I hardly need to practice, I just know how. A few weeks ago, I entered a small competition for fun, and halfway through I realized, even though I could win easily, it wasn't worth it. I couldn't risk my name being in articles or my picture showing up where it shouldn't. I had to drop out. That was when I figured out how much my job takes from me. I don't even want to think about having a relationship." Megan nodded, and they both sat quietly for a moment, playing with their shot glasses. After a bit, April asked Megan directly, "Do you have any friends outside of work?" Megan looked at April with a mix of emotions that April couldn't quite place. Was it sadness and relief together? "Not really. I have a couple of friends back in Idaho, where I'm from. I have to keep some distance most of the time. But it's nice to go home and see them living their normal lives." "No one around here, though. The job makes it hard to meet anyone who isn't part of my work. Honestly, if I tried making friends, I would have to lie so much that the friendship wouldn't be real, so what's the point?" April nodded and took a sip of her soda. She felt the same way. "What about family?" "My family doesn't talk to me. They are very religious, and you can guess how they feel about my free-spirited ways. I was kicked out when I was 18. The only one who still reaches out is my brother, and that's not often. He knows I live in Washington and that I do something secretive, but that's about it. What about you?" "I have no family. My mom and who I thought was my dad died when I was a baby. I grew up in the system, but my Uncle Marcus, who turned out to be my real dad, watched over me and made sure I was okay. He's the closest thing to family I've had. He's the only one who has ever loved me." Megan's eyes widened with sympathy. April gave her a smirk and rolled her eyes. I know, my life is like a bad soap opera in some ways. Megan didn't say anything. She just leaned over and placed her hand on April's. I don't know what to say. You are really strong, you know that? They looked at each other for a moment, and then April looked away. After a second, she glanced back and said, Do you think either of us will ever find someone to care about us with the work we do? What man would understand and accept this? How could you trust someone who uses people in their work? April bit her lip. She revealed more than she intended to. She knew it was the drink talking, but she had been thinking a lot about these feelings lately. She saw understanding and acceptance in Megan's face. April, said Megan quietly, I completely get what you're saying. I deal with this every day. You look young, 27, 28. I'm 33, and time is moving fast for both of us. I've been doing this for a while now, and I really understand your worries, but there are good guys out there who can accept this. If you find one who can't, well, that's a choice you'll have to make at the time. This job isn't forever. No job is. If I meet someone I can't live without, then I might leave this job. It all comes down to what matters most. Right now, my top priority is this job. I find excitement, I enjoy the challenge, and I get to help people. But I also know what this job truly is. That's why many of the agents often seek connections outside of their work. We are all trying to find something we can't have in regular life. Don't pretend you haven't had anyone show interest in you. April smiled at this. She had received attention before, but she had always been professional, keeping her relationships with her colleagues focused on work. Megan noticed the smile and said, April, remember all the training you've had to make someone happy? Well, the guys have received similar training to make women feel good, too. Megan called the waitress for more drinks and added, Enough searching for deep meanings. You need to think of a new idea for a fun game for the guys at the table. April smiled back. She had plenty to consider, but Megan was right. It was Friday night, time for fun, not serious thinking. 4 months after starting her job, the call arrived. Dermot knocked on her door while she was rereading a report about a recent case. Ingrams had been caught fairly, and she appreciated how the operation had required creative thinking. Her respect for Jessica grew even more, realizing that even with the challenges, Jessica had successfully completed her tasks. Dermot stood in the doorway and said, Are you ready? It's your turn now. Here's the background. He tossed the file onto her desk with surprising accuracy and added, There are emails coming in. Read them, think about them, and there's a briefing tomorrow at 8 a.m. April always felt amused when Dermot used military terms. They seemed strange with his usual style. She reached for the file, saying, I'll be there. Even after working late the night before, studying the operation documents and doing her research, April arrived early the next day. She felt well prepared and had printed various papers to share at the morning briefing. As she approached the conference room, she paused before opening the door, taking a moment to calm herself and gather her thoughts. That's when she noticed someone behind her. Turning around, she found Dermot looking down at her kindly. Nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. Dermot smiled and said, You'll do just fine, April. One thing, though, before we go in. I've asked Desiree to join us. I trust you, but this is a big deal, and it's standard to have close support for first-time operations. April's eyes widened. Desiree! Oh, no! Dermot noticed her concern and said, Don't let her reputation scare you. She just comes off strong, but really she wants everyone to succeed and helps them reach their best. Good luck, April. He stepped past her and opened the conference room door. April stayed outside for a little while longer, thinking about what Dermot had just said. Desiree McGee was the most skilled field agent in the office, aside from Jessica Ingrams, who no longer took on field work. Desiree had accomplished some remarkable missions and was respected by everyone. At 42, she looked 32 and had a strong, commanding presence similar to Wonder Woman. Desiree was tough, didn't tolerate nonsense, and spoke her mind. She was clever and resourceful in the field, but when in the office, she was open and straightforward. She paid attention to details, much like Dermot. She never made a statement until she understood everything about a situation. However, if she thought something was wrong, she would say it, which sometimes upset her colleagues. Though it was rare, she could be convinced she was mistaken, and she was always fair. However, the idea of working closely with her for the next few months was a bit intimidating for April. Taking a deep breath, April opened the conference room door and entered. She grabbed a coffee and a fancy pastry, then sat down near the head of the table. Dermot was already seated, finishing his pastry before starting the meeting. April glanced around the table. Desiree sat at the far end, along with Talia from Research, Tom from Resources, and others. Jessica stopped by briefly, smiled at April, helped herself to some coffee, and left after exchanging a quick look with Dermot that April noticed. Once Dermot finished his pastry, he wiped his mouth and stood up. "All right, everyone," he said with a grin. "We have an interesting situation on our hands. This is a preventive case, not just fixing problems like we often do. You all know our new field agent, April Carlisle, and this is her first operation. So let's give her our full support. We know things can go wrong quickly, and she needs us to be there for her. April, you're up." With that, Dermot sat down, looking at her. After a moment of silence, April stood up, cleared her throat, and glanced at the documents in front of her before starting to speak. "Okay, everyone, here's what we have. The targets are Paul Silverano and his wife, Jenny Silverano. They live here in Washington and have 3 children, Millie, who is 4, Tommy, who is 6, and Paulie Jr., who is 9. Paul and Jenny focus a lot on their kids. Their last vacation was to Disney World. On the surface, they seem to have a happy marriage. There's no indication of any affairs, at least not that we've found, and they appear to care for each other, or at least that's the impression they give to others. Jenny can be tough and direct, while Paul is relaxed yet completely in control. Paul works as a negotiator at the State Department. He has been there for about 15 years and is a key part of the team. Right now, they are deep in talks about a secret agreement with China regarding cyber issues. Paul is seen as the main person they talk to seriously. Meanwhile, the IRS has been trying out some new technology. It's very confidential, so details are scarce. However, it involves recognizing handwriting to match bank accounts with their true owners based on signatures. The goal is to find people who are hiding their wealth. As I mentioned, it's still being tested, so look for more information in the briefing paper. Interestingly, while testing this new technology, the IRS found an account that they believe belongs to Paul Silverano. It has almost $470,000 in it, but it's not under his name. They suspect it could be linked to some wrongdoing, and they are worried he might be in trouble, possibly even being blackmailed. This could be a hidden fund for illegal payments, which led them to investigate further. Due to the treaty talks, the State Department is worried about Paul's situation. Unfortunately, Paul is about to receive some upsetting news. Tommy and Paulie Jr. are not actually his children. There's a medical office at his workplace, which is not in the main State Department building, but in a nearby office. His children are seen there for checkups because there are usually no long waits, and it's easier since it's all covered by the government. The government has a DNA testing system now for identifying bodies in case of emergencies. Anyone visiting that medical office gives a sample, and one of the researchers noticed that the DNA of Paul and 2 kids do not match. Normally, the government would just ignore this kind of personal issue and move on, but they didn't consider that Paul's uncle has recently been diagnosed with serious health problems and needs a donor. To find a suitable match, they will use the DNA test results. This test will show Paul that his children are not his, and there's concern that he may struggle to cope, which could jeopardize the treaty with China. Once personal issues came into play, other agencies that typically lend assistance withdrew from the situation, leaving this to us. Our job now is to find a way to manage the situation, whatever that involves. We need to make sure he can finish the treaty talk successfully, and hopefully he won't feel overwhelmed afterwards. Everyone was quiet as they thought about the task. April grabbed her coffee quickly and continued. About the children, it seems they come from 2 different relationships Mrs. Silverano had. Luckily, the father's DNA is in the same database. Paul and Jenny Silverano are part of a close group of about 4 other couples. The fathers of these children are Michael Carano and Tony Fastino. Both are married and have kids. They grew up together in the Bronx, New York, and have stayed close throughout the years. They all work in government roles across Washington. Carano and Fastino use the same health care that Paul Silverano uses, which is why their information is recorded. There's also one more member of this friend group who is not local, Brad Tomlinson. He grew up with them but went into science and now works at a lab in Palo Alto, California, focusing on DNA studies. They meet every 6 months in Las Vegas, and Paul tries to visit San Francisco sometimes to go fishing with Tomlinson. So we know this situation is coming up quickly. We need to step in and manage it. The documents we have are on the table. I did some basic research on these people online and thought about how he might react and what we could do in response. Any questions? She scanned the room as everyone processed the information or looked over their papers. Desiree asked, "Can we stop this before it happens? Make it so he never finds out?" April replied, "I don't think so. While the state does use this medical group, they aren't in full control. They can apply some pressure, but it's also about medical ethics. This group cares about their integrity. The leader is very strict about these things. However, it's also a matter of time. We can't stop every DNA test that could be done for these boys. It will happen at some point." Desiree kept insisting, "Yes, but later isn't the same as now, not with treaty talks happening." April agreed, but added, "That's true, but if it doesn't come out now, the medical group could face a lawsuit later when it does. They conducted DNA tests. They were aware. Why didn't they inform him? You can understand their perspective." Desiree nodded, acknowledging April's view. Talia raised her hand and asked, "Do we know why the wife did this? One child might be an accident, but 2 seems planned, right?" April nodded and replied, "I agree. We don't have enough information to be sure, and I feel uneasy making guesses. We need to learn more. Finding out will be important, but it won't tell us everything. Without understanding the situation, we are really in the dark." One of the research assistants asked, "Do we know how he might react?" April thought for a moment and then said, "I don't have a complete profile yet, but from what I've read, it doesn't look good. This man seems to have a nice life. He has a good job, a lovely wife, and 3 kids, and he even coaches their swimming teams. However, he does have a history of struggling emotionally. He had a tough time in college when he discovered his mother was unfaithful. Though he's a strong negotiator, he's still human. This news will affect him, and based on his past, it might not go well. The state is understandably worried. They have a lot riding on these talks and can't afford any mistakes. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be here, would we?" After discussing their findings for a few more minutes, April said, "All right, everyone, this is a high-pressure situation. We have about 25 days until the DNA results come in. We need to be ready by then. I need research on both groups, the kids and their fathers and families, within 5 days. I will create a profile and a plan, and we will meet again a week from today. Let's move, everyone. I need you all to really step up. We need to show why we have these high salaries." There were some murmurs of concern from the research team about the tight schedule as the meeting ended, but April felt satisfied with how it went. She was picking up her papers when she noticed Desiree standing next to her. April looked up, waiting for her to speak. "You did a great job in that meeting, but do you realize the pressure you've put on these people? There's no way you can get enough background in 5 days for a proper profile." "Yes," April replied, "but we don't really have a choice. I believe a lot of this work will have to be done on the fly, and I will need to adjust the profiles and plans as we go. We just don't have the time for the usual detailed work." "You're right," Desiree said. "What a way to start your first operation. Good luck. I'll be watching with interest." April sighed in relief as Desiree left the room. She smiled as she remembered what Desiree had said, but her smile faded when she thought about all the work ahead of her. They rushed the project. Desiree and April were both unhappy with the final results. They gathered what information they could in a short time. Although they found quite a bit, especially online, there were still missing pieces. They did not fully understand the motivations of anyone involved, and all April could do was plan for every possible outcome. Everyone knew this mission would be more unpredictable than usual, but they couldn't change that. 7 days later, everyone met in the conference room. Desiree entered last, holding her special coffee mug with a funny saying on it. Once the door closed, a weary April stood and said, "Okay, we all know our situation. We've shared the information and background we gathered. I sent out my initial plan, and most of you have looked it over. For those who haven't had time, the main idea is that I will be stepping in for Paul Silverano's assistant, who has fallen ill. Silverano relies on his assistant more than most, and she feels almost like family to him. If I can act well, it should help me connect with Jenny too and learn more about the situation. I hope I'm skilled enough for this. I will present myself as an adopted child, playing up that angle to help him feel at ease with the idea of raising someone else's child." Dermot nodded and scribbled some notes. "All right. Are we all clear on our roles? We'll need to be very flexible with this. I really won't know what needs to be done until I get in there and see how everyone interacts. So, please stay alert, keep your phones on, and be ready. This is a big responsibility for me. Any questions?" There were only a few questions about communication methods. After that, it was time for April to leave for her assignment. She stopped by her office for the last time for a while, and as she was leaving, she spotted Jessica Ingram's outside. "Got a minute?" April glanced at her watch, then remembered who she was talking to and replied cheerfully, "Sure, but I can't stay long. I need to report for duty." "I just wanted to wish you good luck. This is quite a challenge for you to tackle first, but I believe you can make it work. So far, I have no reason to regret bringing you on board, so get out there and help turn this situation around, okay?" Jessica smiled when she finished speaking. "I'll do my best," April replied. Jessica extended her hand and April shook it before she headed down to the garage where a selection of older model cars and pickup trucks was ready for her. She glanced longingly at her Nissan Z, parked at the back and covered, sighed, and got into the silver Honda to drive out of the parking lot. An hour later, she found herself in the office of Gary Mercer. He was one of the few people outside of Ingram's who knew who she was and what she was doing. She guessed he was over 55, with dark hair that had too much product in it and a fading tan. He seemed to embody the word gray. April imagined he might wear gray pajamas to bed. He was dressed in a sharp suit with crisp lines, and she wondered if he had a bit of a flirtatious streak. His smile reminded her of a shark. An unsettling feeling popped into her mind. "So, Miss Howam, is it?" he asked with a forced smile. "Yes, Mary Howam," she answered. "So, you are part of Ingram's. I expected you'd be, I don't know, older, more glamorous." Mercer made it clear he had doubts about her. April smiled patiently back. "We prefer to blend in, Mr. Mercer. It helps us not be remembered when we're done." "I understand," he said. "Well, you're here as the assistant. I hope you can handle it. It's a tough time for everyone with these negotiations. If you want to fit in, you'll need to be competent, or you won't last long. Paul Silverano is used to his previous assistant and doesn't like change." April nodded. "I believe it will be fine, Mr. Mercer. I've been prepared for this role and think I can manage." She was curious about Mercer's attitude and thought she might tease him a bit, as they called it at the office, and see how he responded. She leaned forward to grab something from her bag, momentarily shifting her position. When she sat back, she made sure to keep her legs slightly apart, trying to convey a welcoming vibe. When she made eye contact with Mercer, she realized she had made a misstep. His eyes were cold and his expression was distant. He said, "I hope you know more about Paul Silverano than you do about me, because if you had, you'd know I'm not interested in that. Your tactics won't work on me, Miss Howam. Please keep that in mind." April looked away as he handed her her pass and details for her assignment. They fell into silence as Mercer led her to her desk outside Silverano's office. He knocked on the closed mahogany door while April took in her surroundings. It was an ordinary reception room, just a desk, filing cabinets, a computer, and a nice window looking out at the parking lot. The wooden walls, carpet, and a cozy chair made it a comfortable office, just as she had expected. Mary turned her attention to Mercer when she heard someone call from inside the office. Mercer twisted the handle, opened the door, and invited her in. "Paul, do you have a minute? I'd like you to meet your temporary assistant. This is Mary Howam. She just came up from the pool." Paul Silverano was sitting at his desk. Although his office was a bit messy, it was well designed with plenty of storage in the wooden panels. A small couch sat in the corner next to a coffee table and another small table suitable for meetings. One wall was filled with portraits of Silverano with different important people, pictures of him fishing with friends, and hand-drawn art from his kids, all framed and displayed. Across the room was a big whiteboard covered in notes and markers tossed around, filled with various messages. On his desk was a large computer, lots of papers, sticky notes, a few small desk toys, a hand exerciser, and 3 framed photos, one of his wife, one of his kids, and another with a group of children, all smiling at the camera. Silverano looked up, and Mary thought the photos didn't show how young he looked in person. He wore a charcoal suit with the jacket on the back of his chair, no tie, and his sleeves rolled up. Bifocal glasses rested low on his nose. His hair was short and slightly slicked back, and although his face had strong features, his warm eyes softened his look. She noticed the laugh and frown lines on his face and wondered how he managed his emotions while working. He stood to shake her hand, revealing that he was tall and well-built without being overly big. He smiled at her and said, "Hi there, Mary. Sorry about the mess. Deborah picked the worst time to get sick. We're in what my tech friends call crunch mode right now with the talks with the Chinese. I rely a lot on my assistant, so I hope you're ready to jump right in. There's not much time to get settled." Mary smiled back, shook his hand gently, briefly looked into his eyes, and then looked away as she replied, "I understand, Mr. Silverano. I'll do my best. I know this is a busy time for you." She wanted him to see her as a reliable professional who understood her role. She made a mental note to ask about his programming friends later, as that hadn't been mentioned in his briefing. As she thought about it, he was working on a cyber defense deal, so it made sense he had tech-savvy friends. They must have overlooked something important. "I'm sure you'll do great, Mary," said Silverano, and April realized he had already formed his opinion of her. She wasn't sure if it was just work-related or something more, but she would find out soon. Mercer said, "I'll leave you two alone. Paul, we should play golf again sometime. I need to win back that 50. Silverano smiled and replied, "Gary, if you want to lose another $50, I'm ready for it. Don't expect it to go any other way." Gary Mercer looked at him and surprisingly made a gesture that April thought seemed rude. Silverano just smiled wider and said, "Yeah, your family too." Noticing that April looked a bit uneasy, Silverano assured her, "Don't worry, Gary is like family to us. We just like to tease each other. It's part of the deal." April felt unsure and simply said, "Oh." Silverano turned back to Mercer, saying, "All right, off you go. Go practice your swing, and remember to take out your wallet." "Sure thing," replied Mercer as he left the room. "So," said April, trying to find a way to continue, "what do you need from me first, Mr. Silverano?" "First, call me Paul. I'm only Mr. Silverano in meetings, all right?" April nodded. "Then, I need all the department heads from State and the Pentagon's civilian team for cyber operations in the conference room by 3 this afternoon. Do whatever you need to get them here. We have some urgent matters to discuss. Can you do that, Mary?" "Oh, I'm sure I can, Mr. Silv." "Paul," April responded with a smile, grateful she had spent the previous evening studying the operations manual for the State Department. She was ready to make the necessary calls and get started. The main focus right now is the upcoming talks with the Chinese. There's a preliminary meeting with some of their representatives in a couple of weeks. Although it's supposed to be about trade, the real reason for their visit is to finalize this cyber defense treaty, and it needs to go smoothly. I'll be counting on your skills, all right? This is significant for you, for me, and for our country. Do you understand?" April nodded, her eyes widening slightly with the importance of the task. "Great. I don't usually ask this because I have a coffee machine in my office, but it's broken now. Can you fetch me some coffee? Just black with 1 sugar, please. I like my coffee simple." "Of course," replied April. "I just need to find the break room." "Third door down on your left," Silverano said as he turned back to his desk and picked up the phone. April wanted to observe how he worked, but as his assistant, she needed to begin her tasks. First, she decided to get some coffee. For the next 3 days, April worked hard to be effective, smile often, and be proactive. She focused on her tasks, watched Silverano in his meetings, and learned from him to understand how to better support him with what lay ahead. He was sharp, smart, and knew when to stay quiet. He showed true passion for causes he believed in, but he could also pretend to be enthusiastic when the situation called for it. She caught him doing this a couple of times, and couldn't help but smile as she saw others in a meeting think he genuinely cared about the concerns of teenage hackers in Beijing. April noticed that he valued balance. When he spoke with his peers in other offices, he made sure to offer them something based on what they could give him in return. She observed this again in conversations with Chinese officials. His skill in negotiations stemmed from this deep sense of fairness. He even admitted that some of the requests from the U.S. weren't balanced, and he defended the Chinese perspective during discussions. Watching this made April realize that balance and fairness were important traits in Paul Silverano, which would likely make the upcoming news even harder for him. One memorable moment was when April received a phone call from Jenny Silverano, his wife. She was in the office trying to coordinate travel plans for delegates for upcoming negotiations when she answered the phone and was greeted by a loud, high-pitched voice that reminded her of every New Yorker she had known. "So, you're the new office assistant, huh?" Unsure of how to reply, April said, "This is Mr. Silverano's office. How can I help you?" There was a scoff on the other end, followed by, "Oh my God, he has an assistant now?" April was surprised. If this was who she thought it was important for her to get along with the person on the line, but she hadn't introduced herself yet. Hello? May I ask who's calling?" "This is his wife. I'm Jenny. You can call me Mrs. Silverano." "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Silverano. I'm Mary. I'm new here. I didn't realize it was—" Jenny laughed and interrupted. I know, I'm just teasing you. Think of it as a welcome. I really liked Jenny, his last assistant, so you have some big shoes to fill. Is the man in?" "Mr. Silverano is on a conference call. I can have him call you back after that if that's okay. It might take at least an hour, though." "Sweetie, if you can actually get him to call me at all, I'd be surprised. He never calls me back." "Sure, Mrs. Silverano, I'll have him call." "I'll believe it when I hear it," replied Jenny Silverano dryly. "Later, Barbie." Then the phone went silent. April sat there thinking about the call and decided she needed to make sure he called back. Fortunately, she remembered to remind him, and even though Paul usually returned other calls quickly, he took his time getting back to his wife. In the end, April found his number in the previous assistant's contacts, made the call, and sent it straight to Paul's phone. The next day, Paul came in and dropped a Starbucks card on her desk. She looked up, surprised, and he said in a tone that suggested he didn't want to say what he was about to say but had to, "It's from my wife. She says if you can make me call her back, you're worth keeping. This is her gift. It's for $50. April's eyebrows went up. A $50 Starbucks card seemed like a big gift for someone she had never met. After delivering his message, Paul turned red, turned away, and firmly closed his office door behind him. April tried to connect with him on a more personal level. She wore a wedding ring on her right hand, a noticeable chain around her neck with a half-heart, and earrings that sparked conversation. She even had a signed baseball on her desk, hoping he would ask about it. She designed everything in her appearance to start a conversation, and while it worked well with the other women in the office, who often asked her about her life, Silverano seemed uninterested. One afternoon, she made some progress while delivering paperwork. As she waited for his signature, she took a moment to look at the pictures on his wall. He noticed her looking, especially at pictures of his kids, and just watched her. She caught herself and felt a little embarrassed when she realized he was watching her. "Sorry, It's nice to see a family like this. Makes me wish." She picked up the papers, ready to leave. Silverano asked, "Makes you wish what?" April looked at him and said, "That I had a family like that. Well, I do, but I'm adopted. I love my parents very much, but sometimes you see a family like this and wonder. You know?" Silverano looked at her thoughtfully. "Being adopted? There's nothing to be ashamed of. Your parents must be great people. I really admire those who adopt. It shows they don't let biology decide who they love." April smiled shyly, biting her lip. "Of course. I know they care about me. My childhood was not tough at all. Sometimes I think I received more love than most because they worked so hard to adopt me. It wasn't just a matter of getting pregnant. They faced many challenges, you know." Silverano nodded in agreement. "Yes, that's true. Sometimes I wonder if everyone should be adopted. If all parents went through what mine did, many kids might turn out better." Silverano chuckled. "Maybe you're right. That's definitely something to think about, Mary." April smiled weakly as she left the room. She felt satisfied. She had shared her important thought, and it was a key part of her therapy plan. On her way back to her small one-bedroom apartment, she chose this location carefully. It was just far enough from the office that she could follow Paul Silverano's white BMW to work each morning and back home, all without raising any suspicion. Gathering information on potential clients was standard practice, and watching his life this way gave her insights. Twice a week, she saw him pick up his kids and their friends to take them to archery classes or to the park for flag football games. She decided that being friendly might be the best way to learn more about his thoughts and decisions. While she could eventually gain his trust through conversation, time was limited. Once the DNA results were in, she needed to be someone he could rely on and talk to. She didn't see many other options for building a connection quickly. However, she took this decision seriously. Developing a deeper relationship with him would mean tempting him to disregard his marriage vows. From what she had observed, particularly the conversations she had with his wife Jenny over the phone and what she overheard at his office, their marriage didn't seem very strong. Still, she understood that with her skills, Paul Silverano might not resist easily, and that created a dilemma. In the end, she found a middle ground. She would suggest a closer relationship in a subtle way. He would be aware, but what he chose to do would be entirely up to him. She would create a situation where it was likely they would grow closer while making the choice his alone. Although she felt conflicted about her approach, she knew it was important for her to feel comfortable with her choices. She was beginning to realize that being a field agent meant making tough decisions that could affect people's lives significantly. She spent a few sleepless nights questioning why she felt justified in taking such actions. But then she remembered that this was why she was hired. She just needed to trust in her ability to help and move forward. It felt a bit bold, but this was her goal from the beginning. It was just harder to put it into action now that she was there. The difference between what she had learned and the reality in front of her felt huge. That evening, she made her usual call to the office and talked to Desiree about her choice. Desiree was straightforward in her thoughts. "I really don't like this. We don't know what you are getting into. You might do more harm than good. This needs to be handled in a careful way, and please be cautious. I'm not happy about this, but I agree that for now, we need to have some open conversation. Just be careful, April. Keep us updated on what is happening." The next day, she wore a fitted pencil skirt with a long slit up the front, black stockings, heels, and a snug white blouse meant for occasions like this. The slit let her show a bit of the tops of her stockings. She completed her look with a black choker and hoop earrings that caught the light nicely. With red lipstick, her hair in a bun, and glasses, she looked like a typical secretary. That morning, she found a reason to be in his office, crouching down to sort through some papers in a lower drawer. Silverano was on the phone, pacing back and forth, speaking in Chinese and sounding frustrated. He walked around the room, focused on his call, using hand gestures as people often do while talking, even if no one can see them. April wondered how long she would be down there before he noticed her. She had angled her skirt so the slit was visible, pulling it back slightly to crouch. Her legs were a little apart, and if Silverano looked down, he could see the tops of her stockings. She adjusted her blouse so that from a higher view he might catch a glimpse. She heard Silverano finish his call with a sigh and toss the phone onto the desk. He moved around the desk toward her. She could see his shadow on the floor, and then he stopped. She held her breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She knew she needed to say something casual for it to seem unplanned. He had to believe it was an accident. "So, do you think the Redskins?" She began, looking up at him. He was standing over her, looking down with interest. She paused, trying to create a moment. He felt it was a real moment, and there was no doubt it was significant. He had noticed her stockings and the way her blouse fell open, and he saw that she had noticed too. Both understood that something had changed in that moment. Their relationship had shifted slightly, and now April had a bit more influence. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Silverano turned, walked back behind his desk, and put it between them. He avoided her gaze and said, "That will be all for now, Mary. Thank you. I need to make a private call." April stood up gracefully, smiled at him even though he wasn't looking, and left the room, closing the door behind her. The next day, she took another step in her plan. April dressed neatly but wore striking high heels. At lunchtime, she sat in her office, picking at a salad while Silverano came out of his office, heading to lunch with some friends. He paused and looked at her for a moment. "Mary, do you ever eat away from your desk?" he asked. April had always tried to eat only at her desk, making it seem like she was really busy. It had been tough to turn down offers from her co-workers to go out. She would say she needed to keep learning and spend extra time at her desk. People looked at her with sympathy, but mostly she was left alone during lunch. She wanted Silverano to see her sitting there, nibbling on a sandwich or salad, looking a bit down while staring at her computer screen. She hoped he would one day invite her to lunch with him. Maybe today was that day. Mostly, yes, she replied, poking at her salad with little interest. Why? He asked. Oh, I have a lot to catch up on and learn so I can be ready when you need me, she said, avoiding his eyes. Silverano had been around long enough to know when someone wasn't being honest. He stood still, silent, letting the quiet stretch out so April would try to break it. Eventually, she did. Well, I don't really know what there is to eat around here, and honestly, some people in this office give me a strange feeling. It feels like they are watching me closely. She intended for her last comment to refer back to their moment from the day before, and it worked. She saw Silverano turn slightly away, hiding his discomfort. I'm sorry you feel that way, Mary. Let me make it up to you. Let's go to lunch, he replied, still not looking directly at her. April had to suppress a smile. I really need to talk to the cleaning staff, he said, as he wiped his finger along the top of the door frame and checked for dust. If you think it's important, April replied, feeling a bit silly for acting so childlike. I'm having lunch with some old friends at the Convection Club. You can join us. It would show them that I have a great assistant, joked Silverano, trying to lighten the mood and distract her from how he noticed her outfit. April looked at him and smiled. With a quick decision, she said, Sure, let's go, as she tossed her salad in the trash. They left together and she followed him to the parking lot under the building where the concierge was going to get his car. Silverano usually had a company car and could have a driver too, but he insisted on driving himself because he felt it was better to avoid the temptation of drinking after work. He only used a driver for official events. While waiting for the Jaguar to arrive, Silverano entertained April with stories from his childhood in Brooklyn. He also talked about the friends they were going to meet and explained that the Convection Club was named because it was a place where people connected and met others they wouldn't usually see, like a convection oven that circulates hot air. April laughed at all the right moments and took the chance to link her arm with his. He didn't mind, which felt like a good step in their growing friendship. When the car arrived, they drove to the Convection Club, a classic gentleman's club. Lunch was served in a lovely dining room next to a big wall of French windows, most of which were open to let in the cool midday breeze. As they were led to their table, April noticed that some of Silverano's childhood friends were already there, Michael Carano, Tony Fastino, and another man she didn't recognize. All three stood up when they saw Silverano coming in with her. April felt uneasy about the looks on their faces. Paul, and who is this lovely person? Carano said, reaching out to shake his friend's hand. This is my new assistant, Mary Hoem. She needed a break from the office, and today is your lucky day, Silverano said, shaking hands with Carano, then Fastino, and finally with the other man. It's nice to have such beauty with us for lunch, Fastino remarked. April offered a small smile but felt uneasy about Mike's slick demeanor. Mary, meet Mike Carano, Tony Fastino, and this is Gene Rayner. Did I get that right? Silverano asked the neat little man. The neat man nodded, and Silverano continued. Yes, Gene is Mike's assistant. His right-hand man, right, Mike? Carano smiled in a way that made April wonder if he realized how he appeared to others. She went around the table, shaking hands. When she reached Rayner, he took her hand, looked her in the eyes, and made her feel uneasy. There was an emptiness in his gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. She felt as if he could see right through her. It was silly, but she had the strange feeling he knew everything about her. She quickly wanted her hand back and resisted the urge to wash it. Nice to meet you, he said with a sly smile. She managed to return the smile, though it felt false. Same here, she replied. The table held 4 settings, but the waiter came and added another place. The 3 friends made light conversation, and April could feel Rayner's eyes on her, along with Carano's and Fastino's, whose looks seemed intense. She understood what they were thinking. After they ordered, April took out her phone and began to tap on the screen. Silverano noticed and said, "Working? Here? It's lunchtime, Mary. Put it away." She flashed a bright smile and glanced at him while focusing on her app. "Actually, no. I'm trying to eat healthier and track my calories. It's one of those apps, see?" She showed him the screen, displaying a small chart of her meals and calorie counts. "Just keeping track. Gotta do it," she laughed, placed the phone back on the table and said, "Excuse me, gentlemen. Entertain yourselves," in a playful tone as she grabbed her bag and left the table. In truth, April's calorie-counting app was something completely different. When the tech team at Ingram's gave her the phone, they loaded it with various apps and spent a tedious afternoon explaining them. The calorie app was actually a recording app for audio. With 64 gigabytes of space, she needed to be mindful. But since the data uploaded to the cloud, she didn't think it would be a problem. Her trainers at Ingram's emphasized that most socializing, and therefore talking, happened over meals or drinks. This was a natural time to pretend to use a calorie counter, which could spark light conversation, and it truly did keep track of calories. Only Ingram's employees knew where to tap to start recording. You could show it to others, and the app worked as a calorie counter as well, but everyone could tell what it was and knew it wasn't the interface of the voice recorder. When April received instructions about this particular app, she couldn't help but roll her eyes and mutter something about people with too much free time. It was her first time using any apps on her phone, and she made a note to email an apology for her comment now that it actually seemed useful. April stayed in the bathroom as long as she could, almost 10 minutes before heading back to the table. She wanted to give them enough time to talk without her. When April returned, she looked around the table with curiosity as she took a seat. It was clear that something had been discussed since everyone got quiet when she approached, and no one made eye contact. "Something funny, guys?" she asked while picking up her phone. Paul replied seriously, "Just reminiscing. Now, what are we having?" He grabbed the menu, trying his best not to look at anyone. April noticed everyone suddenly focused on their menus and decided she couldn't wait to listen to the recording of their earlier conversation. She thought it would be quite revealing. Lunch went on with men exchanging jokes and gradually feeling more at ease with a woman at the table, especially one they found attractive. After lunch, back at the office, April put in her Apple earbuds and listened to the recorded conversation while in the bathroom. There was a pause at the table before Carano said, "Wow, Paul, seriously? You must be interested in her, right? If not, I might—" "Hang on there," Faustino interrupted. "I spotted her first. She deserves someone great, not just breakfast." Silverano scoffed and added, "Yeah, step back, both of you. And you too, Jean. I saw that look. No one is going to pursue my assistant, understand? She's off limits for you. I need her focused. You already complicated things with the last one, Tony. It took a month to get her back on track after that incident, so just stop. I shouldn't have brought her here. Look at you, all distracted. It's embarrassing." Though it was said lightly, there was a serious tone behind it. Carano responded, "So you're going for her then? What would your partner say?" Faustino chimed in, "She'd probably want one for herself. She doesn't play nice, if I remember correctly." Laughter erupted at the table. In her office, April smiled at how the other men were clearly interested and at how Silverano had stood up for her. "Do you think they are genuine?" Carano asked. "They're real, believe me," Silverano replied. "Oh? Have you seen them? Are they as impressive as they appear?" Carano asked. "Don't be silly. No, she wore a low-cut top the other day, and it was just incredible." "They are definitely real," said Silverano. "Ooh, I think the man is in love. Look, he's turning red. How do you become the top negotiator in our group when you blush so easily?" "Really?" April thought about this. Was it true or just light teasing? Rayner spoke up quietly. "I think Jenny might not be happy about you liking someone else." The table went quiet, and April wondered what he meant. Was he challenging Silverano? Just making an observation? Without being able to see everyone's faces, it was hard to know. "I'm sure she would. It's not like she has much to complain about," Silverano said. April noticed that when he mentioned Jenny, everyone else fell silent. That felt significant. After a few moments of quiet, Carano changed the subject. "Oh, man. You know who she reminds me of, Paul? Remember that girl in college? What was her name, Pamela? No, Trudy, that was it. Remember, Paul, that night? Oh man, I still think about it, Carano said. April tried to picture them reminiscing in silence until Rayner asked, "Is anyone going to tell me what's going on?" "Oh, right, sorry. I forgot. We were all in college at a sorority party. We went there feeling pretty good and came up with this silly idea to flirt with 3 girls and see if we could switch partners. I really don't know what we were thinking. We were drinking and didn't have much chance of actually doing anything. But we were young and naive, so we went for it. It went way better than we expected. We found 3 beautiful girls who were really interested in having fun, and we thought we were golden, except for Paulie here. He was completely caught up with one girl. She had him from the start. He followed her around all night. She wore this eye-catching silver dress. The whole night had a 70s theme, all disco and the hustle. They even played some old songs. So when Paul finally approached her and said something like, "Do you come here often?" It was, "Do you party like this often?" Silverano pointed out. "Yeah, something amusing like that. Such a great line." Anyway, this girl leaned in, touched his chin, looked him straight in the eye and said, "What's your name?" I mean, wow, right? And that was it for our boy here. He walked around feeling uneasy for the next few hours. We were all trying hard to close a deal, but it seemed like none of us were making progress. Later, we found out that the women we were with had their own game going. Their challenge was to attract 3 eager guys and see how far they could lead us on to get us to do silly things. There was laughter and the clinking of glasses. Carano said, "The funny part is, we still had a good time. They got us to do some ridiculous stuff like Paul running around the building without his clothes at one point. He was a bit out of it and kept saying, 'It's really cold, just so you know.' Someone ended up wearing some funny clothing, too. It was quite an evening. In the end, they did reward us, though. I even spent time with one of the women. I don't even recall her name next to you, Mike. It was a memorable night. We even had a little competition to see who could last the longest. Paul said he had a great experience, but you never saw her again, right, Paul?" "No, I went back to ask her out and she smiled and said we had a great night and shouldn't spoil the memory. I know where she works now. She's with a big oil company in Texas." "Wow. Are you keeping tabs on her now, Paul? What will we tell Jenny?" Paul smiled and said, "Tell her whatever you want. She knows everything. I even showed her Trudy's Facebook page." "Wow, more information thrown away," laughed Faustino. 8 days later, it was just April and Silverano at lunch. He took her to a local Japanese steakhouse, one of his favorites. He went on about how authentic it was while they laughed at his attempts to pronounce some of the sushi on the menu. April finally said, "Come on, Paul, you're a negotiator. If you talked like that in Japan, you'd be in big trouble." Silverano responded with a faux serious look, saying, "No problem. I'll have people helping me with the pronunciation. And even if something went wrong, I'd just send you in first." "Great, thanks," April replied, rolling her eyes. When lunch came, as she ate, she realized that she liked Paul Silverano. He had been honest with her, and ever since she started getting to know him better, he acted like a true gentleman. He had seen a lot, but he never pushed her. She could sense a connection starting to build, but she was being careful. He seemed steady, except for a few heated arguments she had overheard him having on the phone with his wife. She had heard many arguments coming from his office, not clear words, just loud voices. She guessed it was Jenny he was arguing with because April had connected the calls. There was another argument that morning. When it ended, Silverano flung open his door, his face red and upset. He took a moment to calm down as April looked at him from her desk, trying to stay calm. He took a breath and said, "Mary, can you get me an espresso? I could really use one." She smiled a little and replied, "Sure, I'll get it." But she felt curious about what those arguments were about. Since his office was checked for bugs, April thought she might need to start forgetting her phone in his room. She still hadn't met Jenny Silverano, but that would change soon. There was a State Department event for the Chinese negotiators in a week, and she would have to attend. Silverano would be there with his wife. April was looking forward to meeting her. They had talked on the phone often, and Jenny was sometimes sarcastic, sometimes direct, and occasionally warm. She seemed like a puzzle. As the drinks came and they started on their Capri rolls, April cautiously asked, "Paul, can I ask you something? It's personal, and you can tell me to drop it." Silverano paused, sushi on his chopsticks, then nodded and ate the piece. "Is everything okay with your wife? This morning, when I put her through, I heard you both. It's not the first time. Is everything all right at home? Silverano chewed for a moment, weighing how to respond. Finally, he swallowed and said, "You're right. It's not really your business. But since you seem to care, I'll share this. Jenny likes to take charge. I do too. We often clash. It's just part of our relationship. We can be quite fiery, but she's my wife, and I'll handle it. This isn't new for us." "Is she controlling?" April asked, trying to sound curious yet careful. Silverano threw his head back and laughed. "Controlling? That's a funny way to say it. I haven't heard that in years. I'll remember that." April looked at him, food halfway to her mouth, her expression showing concern. "To answer your question, yes, she likes to take charge. She has her way at home, and I have mine at work. The problem is that these parts of our lives mix. We are both strong personalities, and, well, that can create sparks. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. She doesn't always see the demands of my job, but I also don't always understand her work." "What does she do?" April asked. "Honestly, I'm not sure. She spends her time socializing." "Well, that's what she calls it. I see it as climbing the social ladder. She gets involved in groups, helps with charities, hosts fancy events, and plays tennis. I don't really know what else she does." April almost choked on her bite after hearing that and looked at Silverano. "I don't mean it literally. I mean, she's a great mom and keeps busy. Honestly, I don't know where her time goes. She could be entertaining a whole sports team for all I know. But no matter what, I love her, and I think she loves me too. Trust is key. Anyway, enough about my marriage. You definitely don't get paid enough to deal with that." April managed to nod without saying anything. Just then, Silverano's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and said, "Looks like I'm saved by the phone," then saw the message and frowned. "Is it bad news?" April asked. "Just about these darn DNA tests. I need to get the results this afternoon." "DNA tests?" April asked, pretending to be surprised. "Yep, my uncle is unwell. They are testing family members to see who can be a donor for him. I had to get samples from my kids, and let me tell you, they were not interested. Even though it's just a swab, getting them to stay in one place at one time is a challenge. There are all these rules, too, not eating or drinking beforehand. Good luck trying that with my kids." "Do you want me to come by and pick them up? They won't mail those samples, will they?" "Not this group, no. Do you have time to help? That would really make things easier." "Sure," April replied. "I'd be happy to help." So the day had arrived sooner than she expected. The results were in, and she wasn't involved with Silverano, which meant his world was about to change. She had been working hard to build a supportive relationship with him over the previous weeks. She wanted it to be a relationship where he felt comfortable sharing his thoughts with her. A quick spark can create attraction, but it doesn't always lead to trust and closeness, which she needed. So she took her time getting to know Silverano better, discussing things beyond work, and establishing a genuine connection. It was working, but she still needed more time. She had been focusing on the topic of adoption with him. They even spent an afternoon discussing the pros and cons of adopting versus having biological children. He surprised her with how open he was to the idea of adopting, but there was a firm side to him on the topic that made her unsure about his true feelings. She had to be careful with her questions. Now everything was building to a peak, and she was uncertain if he would open up to her or not. After lunch, April dropped Silverano back at work, quietly missing her car as she did every day. She then went to the medical center to get his test results. They almost wouldn't give them to her, but thankfully she had thought ahead and got a note from Silverano to allow her to receive them. Even so, they had to call him to confirm. But in the end, she had the results in her hands. The first thing she did was head to Staples to find an envelope that matched the one the results came in. Since Silverano had a meeting at the FBI building across town, she spent an hour scanning the envelope with the medical center logo, then making new envelopes of the same kind. She opened the results, scanned them in, put them back in the new envelope, and placed them on his desk. Taking advantage of Silverano's absence, she spent an hour reading the results, going over them twice because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. April had taken a course in DNA analysis before. That course had even led to her discovering that the person she thought was her uncle was actually her father. So she knew what she was looking at, and it didn't seem right. She closed the images of the scanned results, paused for a moment, then got up and went down to the garage where her car was parked. Looking around to ensure no one was watching, she pulled out her phone and called Ingram's. After her call was connected to operations, she gave the proper signals to show she was safe and was connected to Desiree. "April, you're not due for a call until this evening." "What's up? Is everything okay?" Desiree asked. "Yes, I'm fine. The DNA results arrived today. I just scanned them in. I'll send them to you shortly, but I need to discuss them." "What? Are you ready for the potential drama?" Desiree responded, intrigued. "That's the thing, Des. I don't understand it, but according to these results, all 3 of Silverano's children are his." "What?" Desiree exclaimed. "That can't be right. There must be a mistake." "Not according to these results. I've gone over them twice. They are real. For the kids, there are 3 different results. It's not one result copied multiple times. These are 3 distinct children, and they are 99% certain they belong to him since we have his DNA to compare. I can only guess that the results that brought me here were somehow mixed up, or that a mistake happened somewhere in the process. What other explanation is there? This testing was done by a third-party group. He hasn't influenced them. They have no reason to lie. What else could it be? The original samples must have been wrong. There was a brief pause before Desiree said, "Okay, we need to review everything again. We went over it when the mission started, and you were involved too. It's not like the state did just one test. They probably did 2 or 3 to make sure. Something feels off here, and I can't figure out what it is. I don't like it." Another silence followed. Then April asked, "What do you want me to do?" "What do you want to do, April? You are closest to this situation. This is your mission. We will follow your lead." "I think I should stay where I am. We don't fully understand what's happening, and I've noticed some issues between Paul and Jenny just from the arguments I've overheard. I need to investigate that more because I believe he will need stability when he gets news. That still seems like a good reason for me to stay. But right now, it feels like our mission is pointless, at least for the reasons we thought." "Well, you never know what might be happening, April. Until we have more information, you might be right. We need to make sure these talks go well. If there's nothing for us to do, then we can consider it a success. For now, stay the course and continue with your plans. We might need more quiet conversations than we think. Do you think Silverano knows something about those samples?" April suddenly exclaimed, "Brad Tomlinson." Desiree paused to think. "He's the genetics researcher in Palo Alto, right? I see what you mean." "Yes, we need to look into this. It could explain why there was funding involved. Imagine if old friends Brad Tomlinson and Paul Silverano figured out how to change DNA samples to reflect anything. That would be worth a lot of money, right? At least $400,000. You think ahead, April. I knew I liked you for a reason. Yes, we should explore this. In the meantime, I'll start checking back with the client to see who had access to the original samples. You keep going and let's see where this leads us. Remember to check in this evening and get us copies of those results. The team here will want to review them. I'll keep in touch tonight. It's never simple, is it? What is going on? How could anything have happened to those samples?" Desiree laughed and said, "Maybe his kids are superheroes, who knows? We will figure it out, April. Better get back to work." "Yeah, you're right. I'll talk to you later, Des." "Are you serious?" shouted Jenny Silverano at her husband. "I can't believe you just said that," she muttered. April sighed and held the phone between her shoulder and neck. She had spent an hour learning how to use the phone system at the State Department. It had many features, including one that allowed her to join a conference call quietly. This meant she could be on the line without anyone knowing she was listening in on Silverano's calls. The only downside was that one of the lights on his phone would be lit, showing that others were on the call. It took her just 20 minutes with a tiny screwdriver to remove that light from his phone. She figured he probably didn't know much about his office phone anyway, but better to be cautious. She had just listened in on a call from Jenny, and she sensed it would lead to an argument, and she was right. Silverano picked up the phone, and Jenny quickly started criticizing him for not looking at vacation homes in Colorado like he had promised. He replied softly, trying to explain that he actually had a job to do. Jenny responded harshly, putting down his efforts at home and generally sounding very upset about everything. "Look, honey, I said we need to set priorities," Silverano said, clearly frustrated. "No, you didn't say that. You said I needed to prioritize. It's like everything we agreed on doesn't matter now. You say this is all my problem, but I'm making it yours. Just do what you said you would. I'm not asking for something impossible. Just do what you're supposed to do as a husband and father." Even April felt uncomfortable listening to that. "I don't care what you have to deal with at work. Just get it done. You need to follow through on your promises." There was a click, and the call ended. April stayed quiet, hearing Silverano breathe for a moment before he quietly said, "Sure thing," and hung up. April thought about what she heard. It was the same old stuff. After many years of marriage, they were taking each other for granted and arguing over little things. Neither of them seemed willing to reach out to the other once the fighting began. In healthy marriages, people often find ways to calm things down, like joking, being affectionate, or changing the subject. But neither Jenny nor Paul seemed to have those ways, or if they did, they weren't using them. April wondered if things had always been this way, or if it was something new. Either way, she needed to find a way to use some calming techniques to help them both without their knowledge. Luckily, she had training for this. 2 weeks later, the negotiations with the Chinese were about to begin. All the planning and pretending were done, and the Chinese team had arrived in Washington. That evening, there was a welcoming gala at the Presidential Hotel in downtown D.C. The State Department had taken over the ballroom and several floors of the hotel. The Secret Service was present, scanning the area, which April found amusing since they were supposedly secret. It seemed odd for a group called Secret to be so visible. The gala included a dinner, speeches, and everyone dressed up for the occasion. It was meant to be for the trade talks, but in reality, everyone there was involved in discussions about a treaty for cyber warfare. They just couldn't say that openly. April wore an elegant ivory dress that fit her well and ended just above her knees with a lovely open back. Her jewelry sparkled with red gems that matched her lipstick. With her hair curled and styled, she felt confident in her appearance. As she finished her makeup in the hotel room provided by the State Department, her phone chimed. She saw Silverano's name on the screen. "Are you ready?" he asked quickly. "They'll arrive in about 20 minutes. I'll be down in a moment. Where are you?" "In the main lobby." He ended the call, and April took one last look in the mirror before heading downstairs. When she walked into the lobby, she noticed the Chinese delegation looking at her as she headed toward Silverano. He wore a custom tuxedo that suited him well, and she saw he had gotten a haircut that day. She smiled at him, and he reached out, saying, "Wow, Mary, you look amazing." April smiled back, feeling a bit shy. "Thank you, kind sir. Your compliments make my day." He turned and introduced her to a woman standing nearby. "Hey, Jen, this is Mary." The woman turned, and April found herself face to face with Jenny Silverano. Jenny was a bit shorter than both April and her husband, but not by much. She had her hair styled neatly in a loose ponytail that framed her face. She wore a lavender dress that nicely showed her figure, with a simple cut at her knees and a gathered waist. It was designed to fit comfortably, which some women favor if they feel self-conscious about their shape. April felt surprised that Jenny, who seemed so carefree, would choose such a dress. It was another sign that they hadn't fully prepared for this mission. "So, this is the famous Mary. He never stops talking about you," Jenny said with a teasing tone. April knew she should let Jenny lead the greeting, so she waited. Jenny looked at her, and finally, April offered her hand for a shake. Jenny hesitated for a moment before accepting it. Jenny looked her up and down, making a slight pout, as if assessing her. She nodded as if giving her approval. "I see why he talks about you. The dress looks nice on you." Her compliment was somewhat reluctant, but genuine. "Thank you. And I must say, your dress is bold. You wear it well," April replied. "You think so?" Jenny asked, with a hint of warmth. "He says I look like a cupcake, but I like it. These folks wouldn't recognize a designer brand if it was right in front of them." She gestured toward some delegates from China who were nearby. April laughed and said without thinking, "Oh, I'm sure they'd love to try an American treat like a cupcake." Instantly, she felt embarrassed by her own words. Jenny looked at her differently this time and said, "I think we are going to be great friends," just as Silverano came up to take Jenny to meet another guest. As the evening went on, dinner was served. April noticed some members of the Chinese delegation watching her with suspicion, probably the Army intelligence people, and others with more casual interest, likely the younger, less serious ones. One of them approached her and, with his broken English, said she looked fabulous. She thought he deserved credit for using the word correctly, even if she lowered his score a lot because he'd tried to touch her inappropriately while saying it. He smiled widely at his friends as he did it, and she couldn't help but laugh at his boldness, even though it was a bit embarrassing since she was almost a foot taller than him. She carefully pulled away but leaned down a little to whisper in his ear. She let him know that if he tried that again, he would be in a lot of trouble. His eyes widened in surprise, and he hurried back to his friends, probably telling them some wild stories about how they were going to meet up later, as guys often do. Another moment from the evening stood out to April while she was in the bathroom fixing her dress. She wore a strapless sheath dress, which sometimes slipped down her body. Sometimes she needed to go to the bathroom to make sure everything was in place. During one of these moments, Jenny Silverano came out of a stall and saw April adjusting her dress. With a playful smile, Jenny walked over to help. "Here, let me," she said, and stepped in closer. Jenny reached around April to pull the dress up and adjusted the zipper in the back, lingering a little longer than April felt comfortable with. Then, with a swift motion, she joked around and said, "There, all done." April flinched at the surprise and noticed how much Jenny seemed to enjoy her reaction. Just then, the door opened and two other women entered, allowing Jenny a quick escape. After a moment, April touched up her lipstick, pondering Jenny's behavior. She sensed that Jenny had more going on than she initially thought. As the dinner wrapped up, the gathering shifted, and it became clear that Jenny was drinking too much. She had already said a few things to some of the Chinese guests that were surprisingly rude, leaving the interpreters puzzled. When she asked one if the cats nearby were safe or if they would be served later, Silverano decided it was time to step in. "Okay, Jenny, I think that's enough. Time to call it a night," he said as he moved to take her arm. April was nearby and joined the conversation, trying her best to shift the focus away from any tension. She asked the delegates about their favorite music and if they had discovered anything enjoyable while in the U.S. She managed to keep the mood light and avoid offending anyone. "Well done," Silverano whispered to her. "I'm sending Jenny home. She can't stay here. Who knows what she might say at breakfast tomorrow. It will just be the two of us here. I trust you, so make sure everything runs smoothly." April started, feeling a bit nervous. "Mary," Paul interrupted sharply. "I'm serious. I need to deal with her. Just be friendly." April nodded and continued making polite conversation while Paul took Jenny away and put her in a car. When he came back a few minutes later, he apologized to the group she was speaking with. "Thanks for your patience. Jenny has had enough. She gets frustrated at events like this. It reminds her that my work is important, but all her social climbing isn't. It often leads to some unkind remarks. I should have predicted this and paired her with someone to keep an eye on her. I tried that once before, and she didn't talk to me for a week," he explained with a sigh. "Is she going to be okay? You are staying here, right?" April asked. "Yes, this isn't the first time I've had to handle this, and I doubt it will be the last. It'll be just you and me at breakfast. By the way, you're doing a great job tonight. I'm really impressed with your diplomacy. If you want to move up, there's a bright future for you here." "Wow," April said, genuinely happy. She noticed one of the Chinese delegates lingering nearby, the one she had been curious about. Sensing an opportunity, April decided to take a chance. She turned to Silverano and said, "Actually, Paul, I have a little secret I want to share." He looked at her in curiosity as she leaned in close, her voice low. "It's just between us, okay?" As she pulled away, she noticed Silverano's surprised expression as she gently touched his chin before turning to the Chinese delegate. "Yes, Lo Peng, right? Let's chat," she said with a bright smile, not glancing back at Silverano, who stood there in shock. April then linked her arm with Lo Peng and walked away with him, drawing smiles from his friends across the bar. The evening wrapped up as April expected, with Silverano inviting her for a nightcap. April had planned to find a way to be with Paul in private, but to her surprise, it turned out to be easier than she expected. After everyone had headed to their rooms, Paul simply walked up to her, excusing himself to the Secret Service agent nearby. "Sorry, need to speak with Mary here for a moment," he said, gently taking her arm and leading her toward the elevators. April stood beside him in the elevator, feeling a mix of anticipation and curiosity. She knew she was here to do a job, but there was something undeniable about Paul, his confidence, the way he carried himself. He was calm, well-dressed, and assertive, clearly used to getting what he wanted, and it was hard not to feel drawn to him. They walked to his room, and once they stepped inside and the door closed, he moved closer, leaning in with a warm intensity that surprised her. She was caught up in the moment, surprised by how strongly she reacted, though she was usually able to stay professional. But this was different. Paul held her close, his hand gently resting at her neck, and she felt a rare thrill of connection. His gaze held a quiet strength, and for a moment, April allowed herself to be completely present, enjoying the rare moment of feeling genuinely appreciated. He paused, giving her one last chance to pull back. April simply smiled and let him know with her eyes that she was okay with this. April watched as Paul studied her closely, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. She felt a strange tension as he waited for her reaction, his quiet confidence making her pulse quicken. After a moment, Paul let go, giving her space to compose herself. It was clear he wanted to gauge her response, testing her resolve. She realized this wasn't just a conversation or a casual interaction. He was pushing her limits, seeing how much she could handle. He guided her to a chair in the suite's sitting area. The intensity of the moment was clear in the room's silence. Paul's firm presence was both challenging and oddly reassuring, letting her know she could rely on his steadiness. April focused on keeping her own composure, drawing from her training to maintain balance and calm under pressure. In that moment, she felt a shift. This wasn't just about getting to know Paul or trying to make him talk. There was an unspoken power dynamic here, one that left her unexpectedly aware of his strength. She knew he was taking charge in his own way, but there was an understanding that no words were needed between them. Paul led her through the experience with a quiet but firm presence, and April found herself respecting his approach. She realized she didn't need to be anything but fully present, observing and absorbing everything without distraction. By the end, they both shared a silent acknowledgement, one that didn't require explanations or more words. April looked at Paul with a confident smile, feeling satisfied that she'd anticipated his reactions well. She reached out, but he firmly stopped her hand. "No, just follow my lead. You've been teasing long enough," he said with a grin, making it clear he was setting the pace. April chuckled, understanding he was playing into the role with full commitment and focused on matching his energy. Time passed as they continued their evening in sync, following each other's cues. April took a brief moment to freshen up, feeling grateful for a chance to pause. When she returned, Paul was ready to continue, impressing her with his energy. They moved around the suite, sharing a quiet connection in each moment without needing to speak much. His confidence and energy kept her on her toes, but she met his pace willingly, fully present. After quite a while, they were both visibly tired, though satisfied. At one point, April asked lightly, "So, do we need to talk about safety?" More for clarity than concern, she posed the question as she stepped away to clean up. Paul, lying back and catching his breath, gave her a reassuring look. "Nothing to worry about on my end," he said simply, smiling. The room settled into a comfortable silence, each of them lost in thought and calm after an intense shared experience. Paul leaned back with a contented sigh, saying, "I had a procedure done a few years back," reassuring April. She smiled to herself as she went to freshen up in the bathroom, glad for a moment to collect herself. After she finished, she returned to the main suite, feeling comfortable and relaxed. She stood by the doorway, her expression light-hearted, and playfully asked, "Up for more?" To her surprise, Paul quickly sat up, smiling, and said, "Let's move to the bedroom." He seemed to appreciate her energy, and they shared a light laugh, both clearly enjoying the moment. They spent some time unwinding, sharing casual conversation and the ease of each other's company. In the quiet of the room, they settled comfortably together, letting the natural flow of the evening take over. Paul's calm presence made her feel at ease, and their interaction became more thoughtful and unhurried. She noticed how he was both attentive and confident, leading her through the evening with a kind of quiet understanding that made her feel respected and valued. As the night went on, Paul eventually grew tired and got up to fetch a glass of water and a towel, offering them to April. "Stay here tonight," he suggested gently. We both could use the rest. April gratefully took the water, knowing a good night's rest would help them both feel refreshed. After visiting the bathroom to wash up, she returned to the room where Paul was already asleep, his breathing even and peaceful. She lay beside him, feeling at ease, and let herself relax into the calm of the moment, grateful for the quiet connection they had shared. She turned off the light and got into bed beside him, pulling the soft sheets over her tired body. Her last thought before sleep was, "So much for chatting before bed." In the morning, Silverano took her again. She woke up feeling him close to her. She was turned away from him, and she felt his presence. She thought, "Why not?" and shifted slightly to make things easier. However, the morning was even more one-sided than the night before. Silverano seemed full of energy, moving her around as he pleased. He never asked for her thoughts. He just did what he wanted. She knew she could stop it if she wanted, but she was curious about Silverano and what he was like. Another big change was that morning. Silverano talked to her. He called her names and told her to just accept it, asking her how much she wanted and needed him. April played along but was close to her limit of what she could accept. She didn't enjoy being controlled and knew what she had to do, but it wasn't her preference. A little confidence and strength were nice, but there was a fine line between excitement and discomfort. Silverano was walking that line. When he finished, she hadn't enjoyed herself fully and debated saying something. He got off her without a word and went to shower. April lay in bed, thinking about what had happened. There was no question she had been used. There had been no romance, just strong energy from Silverano. His technique was more about force than skill, but she had found pleasure the night before. Yet she felt this was more about her own ability to enjoy rather than his intent. She had enjoyed herself despite him. Silverano had a dominant side, which surprised her since she hadn't seen any sign of it in their work and social life before. This explained a lot about his difficult relationship with his wife. April couldn't picture Jenny tolerating that behavior for long. It did make her wonder why they were still together. But for now, April had to think about the more immediate question of what to do next. She only had her dress on and needed to hurry back to her room to shower and change without anyone seeing her. If someone did see her, they might think she had a reason for still wearing the same dress. April sat on her couch in her temporary apartment, feeling uncomfortable in her clothes after the long evening and morning she had experienced. She picked up the phone, checked the time, and called Ingram's HQ. After entering her code, she was connected to Dermot. "Evening, April. How are you?" he asked in his deep Scottish voice. "Well, I've completed this part of the mission since I've spent the night with Paul," she replied. "How was it?" Dermot laughed. "A lady never shares those details," April responded. "Good thing you're not exactly a lady then," Dermot answered, and they both laughed. April relaxed a bit. "He's nice, but there wasn't much conversation afterwards, which was part of why I was there. He wanted a good time, not a chat." Dermot considered. "It's fine, though. I learned some important things," April continued. "I'm sure you did," said Dermot. "Don't say that. I mean, I gained some insights that matter." Dermot cleared his throat, preparing to speak. "Oh, for goodness sake, I can't seem to communicate as intended," April chuckled. "Look, he's quite a strong character. When it comes to being intimate, he takes charge, and whatever happens is intense. This is so different from his usual self. I think something is going on with him. I feel like his marriage might be struggling because he needs this, and Jenny isn't providing it. I sense there's some hurt there, and we might need to help." There was a moment of silence as Dermot processed her words. "Okay, let's say you're right. What do we do next?" "Good question. I'm still thinking about it." "How long do you think you'll need to figure it out?" "I'm not sure. Not too long. With the DNA situation, there's less pressure now. We're in the negotiation phase, so I plan to stick around. I believe there's something we can do, and I want to see it through. What's the update on the DNA testing?" "Well, we have some puzzled folks here, April. Our team has gone through the process the labs followed, and they couldn't find any mistakes. Everyone did what they were supposed to do. We thought there might have been a mix-up, but we've checked everyone who handled the samples carefully. No one had any motive. In fact, no one, aside from the receiving doctor, even knows Silverano. There hasn't been any unexpected money shown. As far as we can tell, everything was handled correctly. What's more, it was accurate both times during the first results and now. Different teams, no overlaps. We just don't know what to make of it. Well, that sounds final. Our best guess is that your idea about the genetics researcher friend in Palo Alto is correct. We have a couple of experts from Caltech reviewing his research to see if it can help with DNA tests. They believe it might relate to their work, but they need more time for a complete check. They were quite interested when we shared our thoughts. If what you suggested is right, it could change DNA testing for everyone. I don't know, Dermot, it doesn't feel right, but I don't have any other ideas. Well, I'm going to have dinner and then take a nice long bath. That workout was intense for me. Take it easy, April. I'm sure more will come. April winced at the unclear meaning and hung up the phone. She was really looking forward to that bath, maybe dinner afterward. Perhaps a glass of wine? She deserved a little treat. 3 days later, April stood on the front porch of Paul Silverano's house in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. It was an old home, part of a row of houses with steps leading up from the cobblestone street. It was full of history and must have been expensive. April wondered how much he paid for it and what it costs to maintain. She rang the doorbell, holding her folder of documents to deliver, wondering if Jenny Silverano was home. She glanced up at the 3-story building and thought about how long it might take to go up and down. Just as she was about to ring the doorbell again, the door opened, revealing Jenny Silverano in workout clothes, breathing heavily and looking upset. Well, it's Barbie, the assistant. What are you doing here? Jenny asked sarcastically. April gave an unsure smile, trying to be friendly even when faced with Jenny's meanness. She still hadn't figured Jenny out, but she had work to do. Good evening, Mrs. Silverano. I apologize for coming by at home. Paul is in a meeting today, and Mary, call me Jenny. I think you've earned that after all our talks on the phone, Jenny interrupted, her tone blunt even when she was being nice. Yes, so, Jenny, I have some documents here that Paul needs to review before tomorrow's meetings. I thought it was best to deliver them here so he has time to look over them. Jenny looked at April skeptically and said, Do you want to come in? I'm done with exercising. Honestly, I could use a drink. It's been a long day. Do you want one? April was surprised. This was the first kind thing Jenny had said to her, and honestly, the idea of a drink sounded nice. Without waiting for a reply, Jenny turned and walked inside. Sure, why not? Take it easy, she called to Jenny as she walked into the house. April looked around. The place was nicely decorated with family photos on the walls capturing happy moments together. The furniture looked good and was quite fancy, which surprised April since her view of Jenny had been different until now. It fit well with the nice neighborhood they lived in. Would you like lime in your drink? Jenny asked while she was busy at the bar. Yes, please, that would be nice, April replied, still looking around the living room. A grandfather clock stood against one wall, and a marble fireplace took up another wall. Above it hung a painting of Jenny and Paul Silverano on their wedding day. There were 2 couches and a comfy chair, a soft carpet, and 3 pretty bouquets of fresh flowers on different tables, filling the room with a fresh scent. Jenny turned and handed April her drink, and April noticed it was a real martini glass with an olive in it. When she tasted it, it was just right. Another hidden talent for Jenny, she thought. Just what I needed, Jenny said, taking a big sip of her own drink. She waved her hand and April sat down on one of the couches while Jenny took a seat across from her. So, about the documents, couldn't you have emailed them? Jenny asked. These are marked confidential. I can't email them. I need to deliver them in person, April replied, setting her drink down and placing the folder on the coffee table. Honestly, I don't think there's much that's really confidential, but you know how these government offices can be. They'd make even the simplest things classified if they could. Jenny nearly spat out her drink when she heard this and then laughed. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Those guys and their fragile egos. They think it's all about what they know that no one else does. They just don't realize that a lot of what they know isn't important to anyone else, Jenny said with a smirk. April smiled back, took another sip of her drink, and looked around again. This is a lovely house. Jenny made a face. It's nice for sure, but it's a pain to keep clean. So much to do, and I really dislike cooking. We definitely need a housekeeper. I'm too busy to handle it all. Who actually enjoys doing that kind of work? Paul was supposed to manage that, but like with many things, he just let it slide. April didn't know how to respond without causing tension, so she just nodded and took another sip of her drink. To her surprise, she felt relaxed, despite her worries about Jenny. Jenny had a curious look on her face, as if she was observing her. When she caught April staring, she said, "Oh, sorry, I was just looking at you out of curiosity." "Curious about what?" April asked. April felt a strange haze creeping over her, realizing with alarm that her speech was slurred and her movements unsteady. She tried to stand, but her legs felt weak, and she sank back into the chair, struggling to stay alert. Jenny watched her calmly, sipping her drink. "You know, I can see why my husband was interested in you," she said, an unsettling edge to her tone. April's eyes widened, trying to respond, but the words wouldn't come out right. Sensing April's discomfort, Jenny moved closer and sat beside her. "Look, I know what he does, and I can tell when he's stepped outside the lines," she said, her voice low and tense. "Don't pretend. I know you were with him. A wife knows these things." April tried to form a reply, hoping to smooth over the tense exchange, but her mind was cloudy, and she felt powerless to respond effectively. Jenny reached out, brushing April's hair with a surprising gentleness, pulling her into a brief, unexpected embrace. There, Jenny murmured. "We'll sort this out." Suddenly, Jenny's demeanor changed. She held April's gaze firmly, her expression unreadable. April was jolted by a rush of adrenaline that momentarily cleared her senses, and she found herself responding with a wary but calm resolve. April gathered herself, realizing this encounter might reveal more than Jenny intended. Keeping her focus, she decided to see where Jenny was going with this, hoping to understand the underlying tension between them. In that moment, April resolved to remain sharp, sensing that Jenny's intentions went deeper than she'd first thought. April decided to go along with Jenny's demands, hoping to gain insight into what was driving her. Jenny's approach was intense, her demeanor commanding. Her gestures were firm, maintaining control with small but deliberate actions that left April no room for input. She noticed how Jenny seemed to relish being in charge, moving with a kind of calculated confidence that kept April firmly under her direction. At one point, Jenny pulled April toward the bedroom, where she opened the closet and brought out several items, arranging them methodically. She placed a decorative collar around April's neck, attaching light chains that limited her movement on the bed. April allowed it, deciding that any resistance now would close off the chance to understand Jenny's motivations fully. As the evening wore on, April observed Jenny's behavior closely, noting how she expressed a sense of control. It became evident that this encounter was more about power dynamics and Jenny's need to assert herself. April remained cooperative, choosing not to push back, focusing instead on figuring out the deeper reasons behind Jenny's actions. The evening ended with Jenny satisfied while April sat quietly, reflecting on the strange encounter. She realized that Jenny's actions had revealed more about her insecurities than about anything else. April quickly realized that Jenny enjoyed keeping her on edge, teasing her with intense moments, but never quite letting her relax. Jenny's every move was calculated to control the situation, leaving April feeling both frustrated and restrained by the lack of control. As the evening wore on, April found herself increasingly at Jenny's mercy, unable to assert herself in any way. Just as she was struggling with the situation, Paul walked into the room. The air became tense as he took in the scene, his expression unreadable. Jenny greeted him coolly, with a hint of sarcasm. "Welcome home, dear," she said, her tone sharp. The room fell silent as the three of them looked at each other, each considering what would happen next. Jenny spoke first. "Yes, I was just putting her through her paces. She has some skill, but I think she could use more guidance." Paul looked over at April, considering Jenny's words. "My responsibility?" "One evening hardly makes her mine," he said, not bothering to deny anything. April observed their exchange, realizing that they had likely been through similar situations before. Jenny shrugged, unfazed. "Well, I thought I'd see for myself. She's been cooperative enough, though I doubt her heart's really in it." Paul gave her a steady look, removing his jacket and setting it aside. Jenny glanced at April and said, "So are you planning to stay and join us?" She added with a smirk, "I've kept her waiting. I'd enjoy seeing you finish this." April watched as the interaction unfolded, realizing she had a choice to make. The restraints she wore were more symbolic than functional, designed more for show than to actually prevent her from leaving. With a bit of effort, she could break free, and she knew that the power dynamics in the room weren't entirely out of her control. In that moment, she considered her options carefully. She knew that she could expose the entire situation if she wanted. She had resources with her, even a testing kit that could verify the substances she suspected had been slipped into her drink. If she chose, this could lead to serious consequences for both Jenny and Paul. But she weighed the moment, reminding herself that staying calm was often the best approach. This was just another situation she was trained to handle, and she resolved to maintain control over herself, even if others around her seemed intent on testing her limits. April decided it was best to observe how Jenny and Paul interacted, considering it a chance to learn more about their relationship. She steeled herself, determined to stay calm and focused. Paul approached, taking charge without hesitation, while Jenny sat nearby, encouraging him, her tone sharp and full of control. For the next couple of hours, they maintained an unrelenting focus on keeping April in a passive role. Each seemed to play their part in a carefully orchestrated power dynamic, each action clearly planned and intended to assert control. Throughout the evening, April noted how well Jenny and Paul seemed to understand each other, working together seamlessly, each guiding the other with subtle gestures. They took turns managing the situation, alternating between giving instructions and reacting with precise timing, almost as if they were following an unspoken script. This unusual coordination, though unsettling, gave April insights into their complex relationship. As the night ended, April felt exhausted from maintaining her role. She was physically drained, and though she managed her role professionally, she was ready for the experience to be over. The unusual dynamic was eye-opening, revealing hidden facets of both Jenny and Paul that she hadn't fully understood until now. Despite her discomfort, she felt she had gained valuable information. As she dressed, she reflected on the experience and everything she'd observed. Her understanding of Jenny's character, particularly, had sharpened, showing a more manipulative and controlling side. April knew this new perspective would be essential for her next steps. She felt ready to plan her approach for dealing with the Silveranos in a way that could possibly strengthen their relationship and achieve the goals of her assignment. The following morning, April relaxed at home and called in her update. She greeted her contact, Desiree, on the line. "Good morning, Desiree," she said, sitting on her couch with a fresh cup of coffee. "I've gained a much clearer picture of the situation now." "I had a feeling, but now it's almost certain that Paul and his wife Jenny both like to take charge. The tension I see is because each of them is trying to control the other. Jenny is open about it, while Paul is more subtle. They both seem a bit restrained, but they are definitely trying." "That's interesting. I can't wait to hear more. Did you find this out in a surprising way?" April laughed. "You could say that. How far did it go? You're okay, right?" "Oh yes, they're more about words. There's some pushing back, but nothing harsh. I can handle that. If it got out of hand, I would have stepped in. It would have been uncomfortable, but I could have managed." "Good. Now that you know this, what's your plan? Changing a relationship like this is not easy. It takes time." "I know, but we don't have that much time. I have a plan. I'm going to inspire them." "Bringing in a new focus? Smart. Do you need any help?" "I think I can manage it on my own." "Go for it. Same time tomorrow?" "Talk soon, Des."